Enemy Zero is one of the most tense horror games I've ever played. Few games make each shot count as much as Enemy Zero. You're dealing with invisible enemies in these maze-like halls of a spaceship. You need to make use of sound positioning to line up your shots and pray that you hit them. Although at times it could veer into the realm of frustration, when it's firing on all cylinders, few games match the tension of Enemy Zero. A 1996 title, Enemy Zero is one of the earlier horror titles to take heavy influence from the Alien films for its setting. And boy, is Enemy Zero unapologetic in what it pulls from Alien. From its looks to how the plot unfolds, this is Alien through and through, with a few tweaks to make it its own. It also pulls in bits and pieces from other sci-fi works like Blade Runner to round out the plot. Enemy Zero is the follow-up to D, a surprise 1995 hit from the mind of the late gaming auteur pioneer Kenji Eno. Enemy Zero has stretches that plays exactly like D, on-rails navigation through FMV environments. But that was all we had in D. In Enemy Zero, we also navigate these maze-like hallways in real time, dealing with these invisible threats along the way. It's a title working with a far larger budget and scope than D. There are some frustrations that arise with this greater scope. A 1996 release in the early stages of 3D gaming, Enemy Zero did venture into unfamiliar territory for its time, but its strengths, like its high levels of tension, more than outweigh its shortcomings. It's one of the better, more unique horror titles I've covered on the channel, one that's well worth your time checking out.
Tell me, Laura, how do you feel? I mean about David. Everyone is saying that the special feelings you have for each other are... forget it. If we manage to survive, I'll get all the details.
Enemy Zero leaves quite the impression with its boot-up cutscene, one of the better ones I've come across. One that gets you pumped for what's to come. These boot-up cutscenes are a bit of a lost art in the modern gaming landscape. Upon finishing this cutscene, the two words that popped to mind were, hell yes. The music does most of that heavy lifting. Pulsating music track that wouldn't sound out of place on a Warp Records release. Not to be confused with Warp, the game company that made Enemy Zero. I'm talking the record label that was the go-to for electronic music of this era. Notable acts include the likes of Aphex Twin. This is a 90s track through and through. That 303 synth delivers some great bass lines along with a 909 for drums. At least I think it's a roll-in 303 and 909. Gearheads, do correct me if I'm wrong here. There's some fast-scrolling text that's gone before you know it. Slowing it down, here is what it says. Enemy Zero will become a more movie-oriented title, with Laura as an actress. The main stage of the work will be this space itself. But Enemy Zero will have an aspect of amusement as a game as well, with a less weight. One of the conceptual subjects of the work will be digital sadness multimedia, as digital media has ephemeral factors and risks. Through showing Enemy Zero, I would like to make it clear that there are such contingency risks in the digital world of the modern times. Not sure what to make of that. In case you're wondering what the word ephemeral means, as it did grab my eye. One of those words I've heard, but if you ask me to define it, I'd draw a blank. Describes something fleeting that lasts for a very short time. Now, as great as this boot-up cutscene is, there are a couple of things to note. One is its tone. The game has a stark contrast in pace. The cutscene sells it like a thrill ride. The game itself is much more of a slow burn with its deliberate pacing. The other element is the length of this cutscene. It runs about 4 minutes. Chopping it down by a minute or so could have made it as effective and efficient. The reason I also mention its length is there's another cutscene when you boot up a new game. One that's about 7.5 minutes in length. One that falls in line with the game's tone and pace. While this cutscene could have also used some trimming down, it is still excellent and attention-grabbing, although in a different way than the boot-up cutscene. Instead of pulsating electronic beats, it's far more low-key, that being ivory keys of a piano. It's quite the pretty track here, yet there's something eerie about it at the same time. What adds to that feeling of unease are the sounds beneath, something that sounds like the ambience of a spaceship rumbling under the piano track. To note, this is one of the tracks that flag YouTube's content ID, so I won't be playing it here. Further adding to this feeling are the flashes of disturbing images that pop up on screen. Add these all together and you build a sense of intrigue and dread. With regard to the music of Enemy Zero, Kenji Eno roped in composer Michael Nyman for its soundtrack. A prolific composer, filming elsewhere since the 1970s. This would be his only game soundtrack. Kenji Eno was a big fan of his. In 1995, Michael Nyman visited Kobe, Japan. He donated pianos to schools in the city and wanted to see how those donated pianos were doing. Learning this fact, Kenji tracked him down and invited him to his hotel room. He spent the next several hours trying to convince Michael to come work for him, which was a success. However, Kenji wasn't happy with his initial work. He straight up told him what Michael came up with was no good. Kenji would later write things down in text for what he was looking for. Truth be told, what Kenji wrote down in his own words was hogwash. He wanted to give Michael various ideas to come up with several arrangements that Kenji could sort through and use. We do get some repeated footage from the boot up cutscene here, but now with more context. Enemy Zero takes place in the 2060s. There's an emergency on board the spacecraft, the Aki. This state of emergency awakens the Aki's crew from hibernation on their trip home to Earth. Awakening from her slumber, co-pilot and our protagonist Laura Lewis reaches out to Parker, the ship's engineer, on the ship's videophone. We get a first-person perspective of some unknown being making a beeline down the hallways, one that breaks into Parker's quarters and leaves him in a gruesome fate. Laura then sets off to find the rest of the crew and get to the bottom of what is on board here. For some additional context, the manual mentions that Laura has lost her memories. One of the other crew members will mention it later, but it's always good to read the game manual from older games, both from a gameplay and story perspective. You could tell right away with how much of a larger budget and scope Warp was working with here compared to their prior title D. D was a surprise hit in Japan done with a shoestring budget. Although due to a strained relationship with Sony, Enemy Zero only saw a Saturn and PC release. I brought it up in my video on D, but the reveal of Enemy Zero being a Sega exclusive has become one of director Kenji Eno's signature moments, where the term absolute mad lad pops to mind. D sold over 1 million copies in Japan before it even hit the PlayStation. Pre-orders for the PlayStation version were around 100,000 units. Sony would end up manufacturing only around 30,000 units for whatever reason for these pre-release copies, crippling sales. Kenji was not happy, to say the least. At the Sony PlayStation Expo in Tokyo of March of 1996, Enemy Zero had a large showing. On stage, Kenji put Sony's distribution and censorship policies to task. To end things off, Kenji told the crowd that the PlayStation version for Enemy Zero was postponed indefinitely. It would only be for the Sega Saturn, at least in Japan. In an interview, Kenji mentioned they were considering releasing Enemy Zero for the PlayStation outside of Japan. That version was more or less done. This would never come to fruition. This reveal at the Sony PlayStation Expo also had the infamous moment of the PlayStation logo morphing into a Saturn logo. Too bad there's never been any footage to emerge of the event. It was an industry-only event. I'm sure it's buried around somewhere. Still, I'd love to see it and listen to the crowd reaction. While Enemy Zero didn't sell as well as D, it still exceeded expectations Kenji had for the game, even without the PlayStation as a platform, which as we know would go on to become the juggernaut of the industry as Sega fumbled their hardware plays. But enough on the behind the scenes. Let's see what Enemy Zero has in store for us on the gameplay front. Enemy Zero has 2 modes of gameplay, Search Mode and Active Mode. Starting with Search Mode, it plays exactly like D does. Not free movement, but not quite a point and click. Use the direction keys to turn, move forward, or move back. On rails in a way. Laura does seem to move faster this time around compared to D. Still slow, however. A decent chunk of the game's runtime will be eaten up by these movements, or transitioning from search mode to the real-time active mode. On my video of D, I did bring up one issue with its movement system. Some cases of what I call path hunting, where you have to move around a room in an odd way to get to a certain point of it. I didn't find that to be an issue in Enemy Zero, although there were a few times it felt like I should have been able to access part of a room but could not. You are safe in these stretches. No worries about dealing with these unseen creatures. One new addition to Enemy Zero is saving. In D, we had a 2-hour time limit with no saves. In Enemy Zero, we will find a voice recorder early on to save our game. That said, the voice recorder has a limited battery life for limited saves. Each save or load uses up its battery power, although it is quite generous. You can only save in search mode. I do like the smiley face that appears at the end of saving. A little touch that adds a lot of character to the world. Throughout these search mode stretches, we will come across a few puzzles. A few revolve around having knowledge of binary counting. Others have us finding the right items to use with the right location. There was one amusing, charming puzzle on this front. Ronnie, the ship's captain, is dead in his quarters. His nearby computer has a password consisting of emojis. Did he write down the password on a sticky? No, but it is hidden in this room. There are sunglasses near his corpse that we could pick up. Nearby is a calendar with this month's photo being a pair of glasses. Wonder what happens when we use these sunglasses here. Ah, there we go. Clever. Something about these shades make me feel like they're giving a shout out to Lara Croft here. Oh, that would be quite the tight time window. Tomb Raider came out about 2 months before the Japanese release of Enemy Zero, although they could have seen the game beforehand. Lore here looks fly as hell with them. Each quarters of the crew will have a computer we could use. Known as the VEX network system, these computers provide plenty of handy information. One is the database. This gives us a brief summary of the Aki's crew. More handy is the list of rooms, equipment, and items we could come across on board. With the computer, we can also access maps, which are a godsend for these winding halls of the Aki. These hallways tend to look the same, and it's easy to lose your bearings, especially when dealing with enemies. Adding to the stress is that you can only look at the map while at a computer. Thanks to good old print screen, I did keep a snapshot of these on hand. Trust me, you'll want to have them nearby. The other option available is using the video phone. Call up other members of the crew. Although in a couple of cases, we'll find a dead recipient on the other line, like Marcus or Parker. Or a brief connection before cutting off, like with Kimberly, the ship's counselor. Or for others like George, nothing at all. At least early on. Some will be reachable as the game progresses. These do a great job of building that sense of isolation. We already have a couple of crew dead by the time we awaken. Others have a fleeting moment before the connection cuts. Others we can't even reach. We have no idea if they're dead or alive. And with what we saw during the opening cutscene, things don't look promising. Yet, there is still that little glimmer of hope. That brief glimpse, we know Kimberly is still alive. We may be alone at the moment, but there is hope for reunions with the remaining crew. I always love these older games and how they predict the future would look. Enemy Zero came out in late 1996. The game is set in the 2060s. While it pulls heavy from the alien aesthetic, it still has its own touches. The term video phone shows its age during this prediction. That's a term you don't really hear much nowadays. You Google the term video phone and the first result you get is the 2009 Beyoncé single, Video Phone. Not to be confused with Telephone by Lady Gaga featuring Beyoncé, a single from around the same timeframe. Anyways, let's move away from search mode and see what else Enemy Zero offers. This is where we leave the safety of the Aki's rooms and venture amongst the halls. We move around a more conventional FPS style in real time. This is where danger lurks. These invisible creatures will be out and about. We don't have a line of sight on these creatures. We have to rely on our ears. But not for enemy footsteps. We have to rely on our gear. Thanks to the VEX positioning system, or VPS, we have an idea of where our enemies reside. Once we're in range of an enemy, the VPS will set off a tone. The closer we are, the frequency of the tone increases. There are 3 different tones to let us know of enemy position. A high-pitched tone indicates the enemy is in front of us. A medium-pitched tone indicates an enemy to the left or right. A low-pitched tone indicates the enemy is behind us. Enemies will react to our movements. Running as opposed to walking will draw their attention. Within range, they will set off a blood-curdling cry. Beyond the tone pulsing like crazy, there's an additional warning sound. When you hear this, death is more or less at your doorstep. As you saw there, you only get a brief moment of what these creatures look like. A fleeting glimpse. Even slowing down the footage, it's vague to grasp what they were going for here. Now, I go back and forth if this was the right decision. What if they show no creature at all? This fleeting glimpse is enough to give the player room to fill in the blanks and use their imagination. We're not starting from scratch here. Part of me wonders what if they didn't show anything at all. It made me think about Amnesia: The Dark Descent. In a game full of memorable moments, dealing with the invisible monster is its best moment. You could only hear its movements through the water and its cries. But one we never see. It made me wonder if frictional games took any influence from Enemy Zero. I could not find any interviews confirming that fact. It does feel like some of Enemy Zero's DNA made its way into their games. When you look at the concept art, I can see why they did at least include a brief glimpse at these creatures. They brought in the late Japanese artist Yasushi Nirasawa to design the creatures. He worked on a variety of projects like Vampire Hunter D to Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within. Funny to note, this isn't the only Saturn exclusive horror title Yasushi would work on. He did the monster design for the 1998 RE clone Deep Veer, which I've covered on the channel. And did he ever pour his heart and soul into these monster designs for Enemy Zero? He did have 3 unique designs for the creatures. One that is headless, which looks to be what we see in game. A second design had an armless enemy, and a third that was bodiless. I have to wonder how much they scaled back from these designs due to hardware limitations versus the less is more mentality to horror. I look at this concept art and think to myself, how would they move around if we could see them? It is possible the technology constraints of the time didn't allow them to match their vision. As a compromise, they went for invisible enemies with only brief glimpses. I looked through a few developer interviews but could not confirm this reasoning. They did also remove a cutscene that gives us more of a look at these creatures. There are cutscenes later in the game that give us more of a look, but only for a brief moment. This removed scene reminds me of that one deleted scene from Alien, one that gave a clear view of the alien, taking away from the horror. I am glad they took this scene out. On the note of the game cutscenes, Fumito Ueda worked on Enemy Zero as a CGI animator. He would join Sony Computer Entertainment Japan the following year and lead Team Ico. He'd go on to direct titles like Ico, Shadow of the Colossus, and The Last Guardian. For the game's first stretch, we're helpless against these creatures. We can only evade them or avoid them. A trip to the lower level will have us navigating through a maze-like room, while avoiding one of the creatures is a game highlight. To progress, we will need to get past another invisible creature by the elevator. For that, we will need some kind of weapon. Once we're able to access Marcus's quarters, past his corpse, we find a means to defend ourselves. Now we could turn the tide against these unseen enemies. That said, it's no easy feat. Enemy Zero requires precise timing to kill these creatures. We're not using a pistol here. We have an energy gun. You need to charge your shot first, which does take a few seconds. You have to consider that timing when it comes to dealing with enemies. Your shots don't have a long range. The enemy has to be more or less right on you for the shot to hit. You only need one shot to kill an enemy, but you must be precise. Getting that timing right is a delicate juggling act. You have to consider the charge-up time of your gun and the enemy's position. You have to do a bit of guesswork and trust your gut with the sounds of the positioning system. Depending on what gun we have at the moment, we won't have many shots available. You will have to find a recharge station to recharge your gun in the search mode stretches, so may your aim be true. And when it is, you will know when you hit your target. The enemy lets out a wailing death cry. You also get a brief glimpse of what they look like. Like the death cutscene, it's a fleeting glimpse and vague. It's a lower fidelity look compared to the one in cutscenes. It still gives players plenty of room to fill in those blanks. It also gives feedback to the player that yes, this creature is dead, confirming that fact on top of their death cry and our VPS going silent. You can breathe now. As a result of these constraints, Combat Enemy Zero has some of the high stakes I've come across in a survival horror title. Some of the most tense. You have to be on point. Fewer games make every shot count as much as Enemy Zero does. The only game that pops to mind that I've covered on my channel would be I Am Alive. An altogether different system, but on a similar wavelength in making every shot count. Although I Am Alive was far more merciful to the player. There was some leeway if you screwed up. That leeway in Enemy Zero is next to non-existent. If your shot failed, you may have a tiny fraction of time to turn and run to reposition yourself. But by that point, the enemy more or less has us in their grasps. And depending on the energy gun you have on hand, you may be all out of energy. When Enemy Zero bounces these encounters with maze-like hallways, it's a thrill. Few games have made me feel more dread or an oh shit kind of moment, especially when we're dealing with more than one enemy at a time, where you have a couple of tones going off on your VPS increasing in speed until you hear that enemy wail. There's a little out there like it. Due to these high stakes, it is a welcome relief Enemy Zero has a training mode. It eases you into the combat experience. You begin with visible targets and a radar, then it begins to strip things away one by one until you get what you experience in-game. These stretches in active mode are where the game's atmosphere shines. This is a late 1996 title, one from the early days of 3D gaming. I'm also playing the Saturn version here, which has lower fidelity than the PC version. You don't get to see much ahead of you while navigating the Aki, and it's easy to find yourself lost. Graphic fidelity and draw distance could take advantage of limitations to increase immersion. This is one of those elements of gaming that's been lost for a time, save for indies bringing the approach back to an extent. Once you hit the 6th generation of consoles, the PS2, the Xbox, the GameCube, the Dreamcast era, graphic fidelity took a notable leap forward. But in that leap, it gave less room for the players to fill in the blanks. For a great example, look at the Team Silent era of Silent Hill. As gruesome as Silent Hill 2, 3, and 4 could be, there was something lost from the original, the only title of the series on the PS1. The lower fidelity gave more room for players to fill in the blanks compared to future titles. Survival horror titles have a delicate juggling act of tension versus frustration. When Enemy Zero is at its best, it nails the tension. Fewer games gave me a sense of relief when I killed an enemy or made it out of there. But there were times when frustration outweighed tension and detracted from the overall experience. The best example is an early game stretch where Laura navigates vents between floors. She loses her energy gun for a time. Unless I missed it somewhere, there are no maps for these vents. And boy, did I find myself turned around over and over and over. There are a couple of creatures about. You can use their positioning to help orient yourself. I'm not sure how far enemies will go in hunting you down in Enemy Zero. It doesn't feel like far. It's not like Alien Isolation where enemies are relentless in hunting you down. Still, I found myself driven up the wall trying to find my way through these vents, far beyond the point of tension and into the realm of frustration. You can find an energy gun here tucked away in the side room, but this gun works different from the one we had before. It's only one shot before you need a recharge, so may your aim be true, else game over. There are 2 side rooms in this vent stretch, one with a gun and another where we can recharge it. The winding mazes of the vents, it's easy to wind up in the wrong room than you intended. You need to kill these 2 enemies in the vents to progress. It's a tedious affair to kill one, return to the room with a recharge station, and then kill the other. Even then, we're still not done. One creature was blocking access to the elevator, but there's still one final obstacle. There's a panel in our way that we need to destroy, which requires yet again another trip back to the recharge station for our one-shot energy gun. And with both enemies gone, I can't use the VPS to have a gauge of where I am. At first, this stretch in the vents was the most tense in the game, but then became the most frustrating. I can't understand what they were going for by giving us an energy gun with only one shot. But if you want to do that in an area that was a bit more straightforward. Have only one creature to deal with. It's annoying beyond belief to return to the same room over and over again to recharge it. Enemy Zero will have stretches in the endgame similar to this early game stretch in the vents, maze-like without a map that we could find on a computer. But the game handles these later stretches better by giving us a more generous energy gun. But we will get to those stretches later in the video. There are some discrepancies with how Laura behaves in Enemy Zero. She behaves in a similar way to the lore in D. She does not speak beyond yelps or gasps. She's a silent protagonist. Well, sort of. I do love these moments where she shows her frustration with her situation, like trying to open this one locker without a key. Actions speak louder than words. It says so much about her as a character in the situation she is in. Unlike D, Enemy Zero has us dealing with several characters. In our current predicament, it would make sense for Laura to talk, but she doesn't. Like this one moment after she reunites with Kimberly. All signs point to her saying something, but she does not.
Laura, when it comes to taking on the enemy in combat, I know what to do. Tell me, do you know what the most crucial thing is?
So what's wrong with her silence? Nothing. I'm all for silent protagonists, especially when you look at the modern gaming landscape of protagonists who can't remain silent for more than 15 seconds. But here's the issue with Enemy Zero. It's when you load a game, Laura does speak. When we load a game, she gives a brief summary of recent events.
Voice record number 01B, Laura Lewis. I have discovered a secret file in the computer in Ronnie's quarters and corroborated the mission of this spacecraft and its relation to the enemy. Through this secret file, I have come to understand that this craft is returning to Earth from a planet called XGIL.
Now, I'm all for it when games do these recaps upon loading. Handy if it's been a while since you last played. Thing is, it clashes with her silence elsewhere, especially when she meets up with other crew members. One way they could have dealt with this dissonance is have a text blurb instead of Laura speaking when loading a game. But it's not like they got a nobody to do the voice of Laura. They got Jill Cuniff from the band Lucius Jackson to do her voice, something mentioned on the front cover of the Saturn game box. Now, I wasn't familiar with Lucius Jackson before putting together this video. 90s alt-pop, alt-rock feels apt in describing them, very 90s to the core. A band with close ties to the Beastie Boys. Their drummer used to be a part of Beastie Boys. Lucius Jackson was the first band signed to Beastie Boys' record label Grand Royal and would tour with them. Very catchy stuff here. The music and their music videos are 90s to the full extent. Go watch and listen to something like Ladyfingers. Another major 90s connection, they did have one of their songs in the 1995 rom-com classic Clueless. Was this in the movie itself or in the credits? It's been a while since I've seen it, so if you are familiar with the movie and their music, do let me know where it's found in the movie. Clueless. Mispronouncing Spartacus as Sporadicus still gives me a chuckle each time. Funny thing is that Jill Cuniff is the only English voice performance credited. The game mentions the Japanese voiceover cast, but only Jill for the English side. One more thing I want to bring up about Laura here. Laura is what Warp called a digital actress. Similar appearance and model, but a different character than their other games. This here is Laura Lewis. In D, she was Laura Harris. In their 1999 title D2, it was Laura Parton. This concept of the digital actress was a bit ahead of its time. When I hear that term, I think Dr. Aki Ross from Final Fantasy The Spirits Within. Square planned to have her appear in other works as a digital actress. This would never pan out due to Spirits Within bombing. And now if you Google the term digital actress, the first result is Tilly Norwood. Now we're getting into the territory of AI actors. With that, let's now go through the major plot and gameplay beats of Enemy Zero. We begin Enemy Zero in the Winter Tower of the Aki. There are 4 towers for each corresponding season. After we get the first energy gun, we can clear our way to the first elevator. It does not take long for the game to turn the tide against us once again. Creature attacks the elevator, and Laura drops her gun while escaping. Hope you took a left and not a right when you leave this elevator. The right path is a dead end, the creature waiting for you on the way back. Kimberly will talk to us over the ship's intercom. She tells us to come find her. First, we need to head up into the vents. We go through the frustrating stretch I brought up earlier. The one where you have 1 charge in your gun and have to deal with 2 enemies in a vent to blast through. Once we make our way through, we will meet up with Kimberly. It is such a nice relief to now be in the presence of another member of the crew.
Girl, I was expecting to wake up and see the clear blue sky of Earth. Hey, you saw it too, right? Well, I guess you really wouldn't say saw. Maybe feel is more like it. I'm telling you, something is moving around this ship. Something is happening. I wonder what's gonna happen to us. Anyway, our first priority is to establish communication with the other 5 crew members.
In Kimberly's quarters, we can use the video phone to reach out to David. He and Laura are in a relationship, which shouldn't come as a surprise. There's a picture of the 2 of them together you could come across earlier.
Laura, you're not harmed. Thank goodness. Guess you're tough enough to manage without me after all. I got hit pretty hard from that earlier jolt. The summer tower is relatively safe for now. Doesn't look like I'll be too mobile with these injuries. Could you maybe arrange it so you'll be able to head over this way?
Good thing he's all right, isn't it, Laura? You know, girl, he really is a pretty dependable man. You could rely on him, you know what I mean?
But Laura and David are not the only couple on board. Kimberly and the now dead Parker were married. Thing is, this is news to Kimberly. We have to show her by using the video phone in her quarters to call up Parker.
You know, I just had this dream.
I was gonna tell you about it just as soon as we reached Earth. Oh my God. No. I must still be dreaming. But it was such a wonderful dream, and now this. Laura, you knew about me and Parker, right? Why? How can this be?
Did she not try calling him earlier? You would think she would try over and over to get in touch with her husband. We close off Disc 1 as we head off to the Summer Tower section of the Yawki. Kimberly is looking to get revenge on these creatures.
It's to stare your enemy in the eyes and never, ever look away. Just like taking care of a baby.
Kim, these monsters are invisible. That's not going to work. You want to keep your ears peeled, not your eyes. So Laura hangs back as Kimberly heads off, watching her progress on a computer. When she's making her way through the labyrinth, she gives more insight into her relationship with Parker. This scene has Death Flag written all over it. Let's see how this one plays out.
When we got this mission, he was so upset over being separated from his bird. He broke down and cried. You would never think he was like that, huh? We ended up taking the bird outdoors and letting him go, but Parker had regrets. He said that maybe we had let go of our little blue bird of happiness. Hey, let's drop it. I shouldn't go on like this. Parker wouldn't. So it's you. You killed him, didn't you? Where are you?
Well, no surprises there. When we arrive at that spot, there's only Kimberly's gun and not her corpse. Did the enemy take her corpse? They haven't done so far with the other members of the crew we've come across. She's still alive? Won't surprise me if she shows up again in the last stretch. Although after that line about staring enemies in the eyes, she doesn't seem long for this world. And she won't be the only one. The summer tower of the ship is far larger than the winter tower. We have 7 floors, although 2 of them are inaccessible. The game opens up during this stretch, but in a more frustrating way. There's no real indication of where you need to go next. It's more a case of going to key locales and advancing the story forward if you went to the right spot. This can get frustrating with the game's pace and loading times. Going up and down the elevator. Transitioning from search mode to active and back again. Can be a bit of a momentum and pace killer at points. For a time, the game eases up here on enemy encounters. This stretch is more story heavy and focused in search mode. On the top floor of the summer tower resides Ronnie, the ship's captain. You did have a chance to reach out to him earlier, but between now and then he suffered the same fate as Parker and Marcus. And possibly Kim, although that's still up in the air for the moment. In Ronnie's corner, solving the sunglasses puzzle that I brought up earlier allows us access to his computer. Another case of the game lifting heavy from Alien, we learn about the Yawki's mission. Yawki left Earth to head to XGIL to capture the creature known as Enemy to bring back to Earth. The transportation of Enemy is the mission's highest priority. The crew is expendable. Laura is distraught of this revelation, to say the least. The way she falls to the ground, I was ready for her to let out some visceral scream, but that's not the case. I mean, you did bring in a singer for a voice actor, why not make the use of those vocal chops? A different floor of the summer tower will have the quarters of George and David. George is the computer engineer. We haven't heard anything from him when we try to reach him via videophone. The manual mentions that George has a policy to never answer his videophone while working on a project. You would think he would make an exception for situations like these. When we enter his quarters, he's turned away from us, facing his computer. I was thinking that Laura would approach him, turn his chair, and discover that George is dead. But that's not the case. He's alive and well.
Laura, I was worried about you. You look a bit dazed. Did you bump your head? The others? Well, we still haven't re-established communication, but there are more fatalities. Laura, just think of your own safety, and you'll be fine.
Wasn't expecting that the way the scene was shot when we entered his quarters. Nice little fake out. Heading to David's quarters across the hall, Laura has a sweet, tender reunion with him. Though it does come across as a bit sappy and soap opera-ish. Now would be a good time to be done with your vow of silence, Laura.
There's a small ship docked at Fall Tower. We'll escape on that. Was George in his room?
This was another scene that had death flags blowing in the wind. David's not going to survive here, isn't he? We all know the major tropes of these kind of stories. Well, it doesn't take long to discover David's fate. That is, if you head to the right spot after your talk with David and George. George tells us to come back later as he is working on a way to gain access to the fall tower of the ship. David went down to the bottom floor of the summer wing. There's no real mention of him heading down there. If you head down there before talking to David, this side room is locked off. After talking to David, we can enter it. I'm all for letting players explore and get lost, but having a bit more indication of where to go next would have done wonders for Enemy Zero, especially with how slow the game can be from moving from location to location. Go to the wrong spot and it's a bit of an excursion to head elsewhere, where the game loses its momentum and tension and replaces it with frustration. I thought David would last at least until the game's end, but no. Here he is in his true form. On his last breaths or last surge of power, David is an android. There are some awkward lines here in his dying words, like they tried to shoehorn a reference to Roy Batty's famous monologue from Blade Runner and how David brings up rain.
Laura, stop it. Please, don't cry. You must know by now how much I hate to see it rain. Don't you? It's all so strange. I'm a machine. I don't believe it. But why is it so painful for me to say goodbye to you?
So there you go. Laura loves an android. Although, what about herself? Her dealing with memory issues, those flashes of past memories we saw in the game's intro, the way she behaves? Not exactly what I call human-like behavior. Is she an android herself? We can use the chip from David's skull at George's computer for further revelations. David is a creation of George's. David has the assigned task of capturing the bioweapon known as Enemy, record the activities of the crew, and pilot the ship in case of an emergency. While we've been safe in these search stretches, the game breaks convention through a cutscene where a creature attacks Laura. What follows is very much a case of a staff member's barely disguised fetish. Capcom would do something similar many years later in the Resident Evil 3 remake. George steps in at the last minute to save Laura. While the voice acting in Enemy Zero isn't terrible, it's not great by any stretch. But George in particular is a standout. Very much a case of early survival horror voice acting. Enemy Zero did come out the same year as the first Resident Evil.
What did you see? The file on David? I don't know anything. I'm only... Look, don't you know it was rude looking into someone else's things without permission? I have no obligation to explain anything to you at all.
When leaving, George dropped a key that we could use on this piece of machinery in Ronnie's quarters. One that allows us to view the innards of Laura. A couple of revelations here. One, some kind of parasite now resides within Laura after the tentacle attack. And second, her skeletal structure looks more machine than human. George will come in to confirm this. We have another very alien-like moment of George in talking about the enemy and his role in the mission. There are some amusing lines of dialogue here and how specific he gets when programming Laura's memories.
Not good. Not good at all. Even if I return to the company, there's no promotion with a mess like this. You see, the whole reason we went to that star was to capture the monsters, the enemy, and bring them back to Earth. To sell them to the military as biological weapons at a big profit. I was actually against the idea. No good can come out of getting involved in something like that. So, tell me, what does it feel like, to find out that you are not human? Yes, Laura, you and David are androids. The company put you on this ship to assist us as well as monitor our progress. I implanted your memory chip with a variety of recollections and facts. The color of the sky, the name of the birds, the price of a subway ticket, how to calculate the area of a triangle, Fond childhood memories of your mother and your father, even about the unforgettable time in your hometown when you stretched out your arms to hug that oak tree. All of it, everything I gave to you. I implanted these different memories so that you would be more human-like. And in the end, your real memory, the fact that you are an android, was erased. Not good. Not good at all. Even if the company found out, you found out, my career is over. I have to reprogram your memory again. Don't move. Stay still. Hey, wait.
So after Laura runs off from George, what happens if we head back to the same room? George is gone. Did he take some secret passage I'm not aware of? Be nice to know that. Did he go back to his quarters? You would think so, but George is not there. You have to go to David's quarters across the hallway, even without much of a reason to do so, for the critical path to advance. There, George will pop up along with meeting his end.
If you stay like this, you'll be living the rest of your life as an android. Come on. I'll also remove your painful memories of David. Well, come on.
We can find a key card in his corpse that will give us access to the fall tower. There we can find an escape ship to get off the Yawkey. But first we need to fire up a power switch in the summer tower. This puzzle of turning the knobs to turn on the power is a bit of an odd duck. You need to turn each of the 4 knobs to the right position through degrees. There's a piece of paper in the room where we found David, one that seems to show us the answer for their position. Thing is, it's a bit tricky to know the exact positioning due to graphic fidelity. Those along the 90-degree ranges, easy enough. It's the last one that's a bit of a bugger. You have to input 135 degrees for the 4th knob. The thing is, if you double check George's corpse, you will get a sheet of paper that tells you the answer outright. I've mentioned it several times throughout my videos, but I'm not a fan of what I call regurgitator puzzles, where you find something and enter the answer one-to-one elsewhere. Here at first with the paper hint, it seemed to not be the case. You can still solve this puzzle without George's answer. That said, it's a bit of a pain to line up right due to the graphic fidelity. Like the idea behind this puzzle, but the execution, it's a bit off. As we close off disc 2, Laura takes an elevator up to the fall tower. This parasite within her seems to be doing quite the number on her. Although if you take this scene out of context, it takes on a more questionable meaning. The fall tower is a stark contrast to the summer tower. There's next to no search mode stretches. No need to run around various locales without rhyme or reason to advance the critical path. We have other frustrations to deal with. Remember the vent stretch I brought up earlier? We are in that territory again. Unless I missed a room giving access to a map, there is none. We're dealing with maze-like floors where it's easy to turn yourself around. There are enemies about. There is one further cruel twist of the knife to raise the stakes. There are far less opportunities for saving. We need to make our way down the fall tower. Entering an elevator doesn't cut to search mode, a chance that does allow us to save. Instead, when we take the elevator down, we still remain in active mode and cannot save. That said, the game will offset some of these stakes and frustrations after a couple of floors. We will come across a room where we could save, but also the game's best energy gun. One that does not need any recharging. A nice compromise to deal with the winding halls and fewer chances of saving. Much more tolerable stretch than the event section earlier in the game. Although in this room where we find the gun, poor Laura gets another reminder of David. It's somewhat comical how this space helmet has David written in large font. Another twist of the knife to Laura. While you may find yourself turned around in these mazes, you'll get feedback once you reach an elevator. Are you descending? Then you're going the right way. As we continue the descent, we'll get more into biomass-heavy territory. Along with that comes a new creature that enters the combat fold. A more conventional enemy, a larva-like creature scurrying around. One that won't set our VPS off. Although we can hear them when they are in range. As well, we can see them. You don't need to charge up your gun to kill them. An uncharged shot with a tap of the button does the trick. But these larvae can kill you in one hit. You have to be cautious going around these corners. Now is a good time to use the strafe step to ensure the way is clear. The game does ease us in here with these larva creatures. First, we deal with them by themselves before the game throws invisible enemies back into the mix. Simple, but nice little twist to the combat formula. Was it needed? I didn't find combat with the invisible enemies to lose its luster before the game's end. They are more than enough to deal with. But it is a nice little tweak here that doesn't feel tacked on for the sake of it. A nice little addition to the formula as we enter the game's end stretch. After several tense floors of descending with few chances to save, we will come across this heart. One that sets off several cries when we shoot it. The game doesn't dwell on what it was, adding to that sense of mystery and unease. This felt like the perfect opportunity for Kimberly to return if she were alive, and lo and behold, she is. She also takes care of that parasite within Laura's body. She does also clear up elements of her role in the mission. And then we get into more territory of do androids dream of electric sheep? Are the feelings of Laura enough to make her human even though she is a machine? Kimberly seems to think. These are fleeting thoughts Enemy Zero ponders. While the major beats take heavy cues from Alien, there are elements of stories like Blade Runner here. More passing thoughts than going too deep into them. Enemy Zero is not a long game by any stretch. They have more mileage here they could have gotten out of the android elements. Or something to explore in a direct sequel. Kimberly won't be joining us in the escape. She's going to reunite with Parker, her dead husband. She sets off the self-destruct while giving us David's memory chip. After navigation through further mazes, we will end up back in the Winter Tower where Enemy Zero began. While most areas are now inaccessible, we can return to Parker's quarters, where we discover what Kimberly meant when she said that Parker is waiting. On a nearby computer terminal, we can read a sweet, tender conversation between Kimberly and Parker. A conversation that mentions their plans to live a simple farm life after this mission, a life they never got to live. Rest in peace, you two. In the final stretch, our VPS gives up the ghost. We now have no means of knowing about an enemy's position. That is, until a familiar voice decides to guide our way to the escape ship.
Laura, can you hear me? It's me, David. I'm speaking to you on the ship's intercom system from inside George's computer. I feel alive again. I'm alive. You can relax. I'm going to safely guide you out of here. I told you, didn't I? That you can depend on me. Okay, let's go.
This is our final escape, and this final escape was a frustrating ordeal. David will tell us which direction to go when we reach a fork in the road. He will tell us to watch out when enemies are nearby. From what I understood from this warning was to shoot the enemy. Use his warning to take the shot. I can never seem to hit them and end up with a game over after game over.
Watch out. Watch out. Watch out.
Well, turns out when he gives this warning, you have to turn around and go a different direction. He'll guide you a different way. This did take a couple of tries after doing my best to shoot the enemy. Bit frustrating to say the least. With David's help, we are able to reach the escape ship and make a narrow escape. The heavy connection to Alien continues. Beyond loading a game, Laura breaks her silence to sign off on her mission. Although unlike Alien, no enemy did manage to sneak aboard our escape ship.
I have successfully escaped from the spacecraft, the Aki, via the mini-spacecraft. Of the 7 initial crew members, 6, Parker, Marcus, Ronnie, George, Kimberly, and David are confirmed dead. Only one, me, Laura Lewis, has survived. I'm now entering hypersleep for the voyage back to Earth.
The credits for Enemy Zero begin to roll. Unlike the credits for D, which had a sharp contrast in music and showed the staff, this is more conventional credits with music to boot. Although on another disc, there is the Warp staff credits. This is more in line with the ending credits for D. It is 90s as all hell with these slideshow credits. Warp looked like a blast to work at with the talent involved. You can see how much heart and soul Warp poured into these games. These staff credits do show little blurbs of other games by Warp, including the then unreleased D2, which would come out in 1999. It shows an earlier version of D2 before development moved to the Dreamcast. Winding down. Few horror games do tension better than Enemy Zero. Using your ears instead of your eyes leads to some of the high stakes I've come across in combat situations. May your aim be true. Yes, these maze-like halls can be a bit of a nuisance, where tension melts away and frustration rises to the forefront, but its strengths outweigh its shortcomings in the grand scheme of Enemy Zero. It's a far stronger showing than their prior title D. I've been meaning for a while now to dive into the works of Kenji Eno and Warp on the channel, a name I've heard much about but haven't experienced myself. D had me intrigued, but didn't quite sell me on his talents. Enemy Zero changed that. What an incredible experience. While Enemy Zero still sold well, it didn't quite have the same commercial impact that D did. It's too bad they never released a PlayStation version, hampering the game's sales. Part of me can't help but respect Kenji Eno's stance he took against Sony due to how they handled the release of D on the PlayStation. A man who very much marched to the beat of his own drum, and same with Warp the company. I went more into Kenji's story in my video on D. He lived quite the life, and his impact is still felt to this day. I do also recommend the excellent documentary on Kenji from the channel Archipel, one that interviews family and former staff, and even interviews Hideo Kojima. He had quite an influence on Hideo. I'll link to in the card here, the description, and pinned comment. There is one more game to cover in this D trilogy starring Laura, the digital actress. That being D2 on the Dreamcast. After Enemy Zero, I am very curious to see what they got up to there. But that is a video for another day. Thanks for watching. Curious to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you played Enemy Zero, your thoughts on Kenji Eno, your thoughts on the band Lucius Jackson, your thoughts on the movie Clueless. Like and subscribe if you haven't done so. If you want further notifications, there is the notification bell. If you'd like to support the channel further, do consider becoming a patron or a YouTube member, or leaving a one-time donation through a super thanks or Ko-fi. Special shout out to the Boulder Punchers who give extra support to the channel on Patreon or YouTube memberships. For those in the complete global saturation tier, American Boot and Flan Niggle. For those in the thank you for your patronage tier, Tom Terrible. For those in the now this is Boulder Punching tier, Ethan, James Warner, Cray, The Madman in Waco, Natu, The Original Narcisse Diet, Thick Dew, TM Neo Edition. For those in the Jill Sandwich tier, On Hell, Benji, Benny Winterdawn, BBFM Bloxburg, Dark Rod 99, Dragonfang Studios, James Kilgore, Leonard Aronson, Logan Lepin, Mad Morpheus Gaming, Mikkel B, Nico Pero, Sam Jones, Squid Vicious, Strababina, Vinyl Morpheus, Will Han, and Zin. Now for the post-video Q&A, so those in the Jill Sandwich tier and higher can ask these. From Flan Nagel, you're given the chance to pull digital actress Laura out of retirement. What kind of game would you have her star in, and would it be sci-fi or more gothic horror like the original D? Interesting question. It would feel a bit off without having Kenji Eno involved, and may he rest in peace. On which direction with it? I would go with something more gothic horror. With sci-fi, we already have the alien-like approach with Enemy Zero. From what I've seen and understand with D2, it takes heavy influence from The Thing. So a part of me also would like to see a follow-up to Enemy Zero, something more akin to Alien Isolation. On the sidebar, I never got around to playing Routine, but that does have invisible enemies from what I understand, does it not? I should check that out at some point. So if we were going for gothic horror, I wouldn't mind Laura starring in some Southern Gothic horror game. One that lists heavy from the first season of True Detective. Some games do scratch a similar itch to it, but not quite. Alan Wake 2 did pull some elements from it, but I'd love to see a full-fledged title immersing itself into Southern Gothic horror with a touch of Lovecraft. I'd love to see what Kenji Eno and a team with a decent budget backing them could have done. So thank you for the question, Flan Nagel. So again, thank you everyone for watching this video. I'll see you in the next one. You have a heart of gold. Don't let them take it from you.
この男、また人騒がせなものを作ってしまった。このソフトは事件になる。エネミーゼロ。